fifth episode now.
Is it now?
I think, maybe.
Goodness gracious. Time flies when you're having fun.
Does it? A fifth episode of the Armchair Philosophy Podcast. We're very glad that you could join us. Today, as always, is Alessandro. Joining me is...
Troilus!
And a new addition to the Armchair Philosophy Podcast family.
Jordan.
And today we're going to be talking about aesthetics, as promised. Look at that, we uphold our promises.
We do, or we try to.
We try to, at least. Before we get started, I'd just like to point out a couple things about aesthetics and about this podcast. So today we have two people here that have dealt very much with aesthetics. Troilus, you've got some background in aesthetics.
I do. I was originally studying art history at the University of Washington when I realized it was a crock of... and then ultimately I realized I was more interested in the question of why is art beautiful. So yes, aesthetics naturally followed.
Right, and so Jordan instead, he took a different route, but equally as interesting, I think.
I started out drawing as a kid. I've drawn and painted. Well, actually, I started painting about 3 years ago. I paint on the daily, try and produce as much as I can. Really, the focus is painting as much as I can. Spending the time to do it more so than watching other people paint.
Because as everybody knows, it's not very entertaining to watch paint dry, right?
No, absolutely not. Much more interesting to partake in the action.
Right, and the problem with me is that I don't really know what I'm talking about. But the thing is, I hate on aesthetics enough that I think I can ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, you've ruffled my feathers earlier. That's for sure.
Just a lot of feathers to ruffle. Listen, Troilus, you were gonna say something.
Was I now?
You were going to say something on what aesthetics is, how it's structured, because not a lot of people might know this.
That's right. Well, yeah, not tons of people study aesthetics. It's not one of the most popular studies in the philosophical world, though not to say it's not one of the most interesting. Traditionally, it's structured in three fields. You have the study of everyday aesthetics, which is... things as simple as, why do we regard an empty street with one lamp shining on the road beautiful to art aesthetics? Why do we find certain paintings or sculptures beautiful? And natural aesthetics. Why is it we are so fascinated by a mountainscape? So ultimately, from these three fields, it's the endeavor to come to the conclusion of what is beauty, to try and find some tangible crux that we can hold on to.
Now, does that mean when we look for beauty, does that mean that we try to find something that is beautiful, like the most beautiful thing, bar none, within the three categories that you were talking about, or is it beauty as a concept that then describes whatever else you want to talk about? Is that the idea?
Beauty really, I mean, You approach it almost in a utilitarian manner. That which is most beautiful is most beautiful because it has all the beauty. I'm not.
See, it's hard because beauty really can't be tangible. The thing with beauty is it can't really be tangible because it's a passing thing, and beauty really is everything. You can't necessarily define it because if it was definable, it wouldn't be beautiful anymore.
On one hand, I agree with you. There is a degree to which beauty is intangible. On the other hand, were beauty totally intangible, we wouldn't have any conception of it.
Absolutely.
We find ourselves before the Pietà. If you're religious or not, and you say to yourself, this is absolutely beautiful. This is stunning. This is a very emotional piece, and the intangibility behind it is when we start ultimately having to ask ourselves, well, yeah, it's beautiful. Certainly, I'm affected by this on an emotional level, but why? What is the purpose behind it? How can I rationalize this?
What do you obtain from the beauty? Is what you
So for something to be beautiful, it has to affect you. It has to have not just a lasting impression of you having seen something that is beautiful or heard or whatever, but it needs to really be there.
Yeah, for something to be beautiful, I think it would be a necessary condition to be affected by it to a manner in which a person unto themselves would would be overcome with a feeling that they peg as beauty.
Mm.
If that...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does have to resonate with you on a personal level for it to be beautiful.
Ultimately, though, the problem becomes what's beyond it. Where is the beauty that is beyond the object? For there is the object that we witness, that we perceive, whether that be a sunset or a sculpture or what have you. Where's the grist? What are we grasping at that is what is the propelling force behind that experience that is rendering unto us a conception of beauty?
But isn't that coming from us? I mean, we're the ones who are internalizing all these features, and something that's beautiful to me is going to be different from what's beautiful to Jordan or beautiful to
Choice,
right?
It's choice, yeah.
So because it's choice, aren't we the ones sort of coming up with whatever it actually is? So
you can see one object in so many different lights depending on what you choose to dive into.
Right, but I mean, let's say that I'm looking at that same object that all three of us are going to be looking at, right? Mm-hmm. That's a painting. I'm just looking at a painting, right? Yeah. I'm the only one in here who finds it beautiful. Let's say. Does that mean that because the object obviously isn't inherently beautiful to everyone, because we've seen that you two don't like it, so we can rule that out, because we say that because we can think if Troilus had a different experience or had a different piece of toast this morning, he would have been in a better mood, then that's why he doesn't like the painting. If that had happened, then we know that different outcomes or different experiences lead to a different interpretation of things that may be beautiful or how beautiful we see some things. Does all that put together mean essentially that it's not necessarily the painting literally that is beautiful? It's simply a rendition of the painting. It's the idea that I have of the painting in my head that is beautiful, and then I can justify to be beautiful. Then that eliminates anything about being intangible, doesn't it? If it's all in our heads?
Not necessarily.
It's a little of both, I would say.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's tangible when you decide to write it down, and it becomes elusive when it fades, and then you have to find it again. Whereas if you're in a bad mood and you see the same painting, it can be a very negative thing. Whereas, if you're in a good mood, the exact same painting the next day, it will change. It doesn't necessarily matter the quality of the paint. It depends on how you perceive it. And within one square of the painting, you can see a million different things depending on what you're focusing on at the time.
Your point, Alessandro, perspective is absolutely everything. There will be a painting that you may see only in a coffee table book that you flip through it and you say to yourself, yeah, this is nice, sure, I don't find it beautiful. But then by some chance you have the opportunity to see it in person, and you're absolutely floored by this experience. The circumstances surrounding the manner in which you've come to perceive it definitely prevails. There's on one hand you saw it on a coffee table in someone's house, and then on the other hand you actually see the work in its own right, living and breathing. What I think it comes down to is we have there's a degree in which epistemology plays into our experience of that which is beautiful. As I said, you have the juxtaposition between the coffee table and the museum. What we can ultimately discern, and this is speaking only for the tangible aspect of that which is beautiful, is there is an object that we can come to understand in context X, and the object that we come to understand under context Y, that are ultimately two completely different things.
All I asked was, because the beauty registers in our heads, and because we can't really trust the outside, the any impression of the beauty of anything else outside of our heads, right? Because if we do have two people that do not agree with what I find beautiful, then is the need for a tangible piece of beauty irrelevant? I'm talking purely on an epistemological level.
The need for is your question, does beauty exist outside of object.
Well,
inside of your
I'm
brain
asking.
perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does to a degree that we have to see something that is beautiful. I get that, but the real beauty of it, we're saying, or at least like you said before, or like it was said before, the beauty of the object has to be somewhat tangible. I would argue that it's completely intangible. The beauty is intangible by definition, simply because it's in the bowels of our head.
Oh,
that is a part of our
The
body.
bowels of my head. I like that.
No. Okay, no. Oh, okay. Wait, I'm sorry. When you rephrase it like that, I would agree. Beauty is intangible. Nevertheless, we as humans capable of perceiving beauty, of producing beauty even, are capable of partaking in that experience. We're capable of synthesizing that concept of beauty, which is intangible, and placing it into a framework that can ultimately be shared amongst ourselves. Ultimately, and that is, painting or sculpture, poetry, or simply appreciating the beauty of a rainbow.
Absolutely.
Or,
there are certain things that tie us together, that there's reasons why we both like them. There's reasons why the most beautiful things attract the most group of people.
And ultimately, what I'd like to propose is I think that that which is which brings us out of the intangibility of beauty into this mortal coil is the concept of awe. That the one thing that ultimately hinges the natural, the everyday, and the artistic into the curriculum around which our conceptions of beauty rotate derives from awe. Awe can manifest itself on many different levels, and this is what I mean by beauty is heavily tied to epistemology. We experience a painting. Upon our experiencing of this painting, we aren't acquainted with what brushstrokes were made where and why they were made. Jackson Pollock was drunk smoking a cigarette and splashed some paint around, and Da Vinci, was meticulous with every stroke he made. What we are more concerned about is this merger, the harmony by which all things have come together, and things, I know, great word. Or let's take brushstrokes, for example. The harmony by which these brushstrokes have come together to form this image that has become impressionable to us. The very same applies to nature. We see a sunset. We aren't necessarily thinking of the equations in our head that the physics that dictate the rotation of the Earth around the sun. What we are appreciating in ultimately is a consequence of those maths. But it is the experience unto itself, even though it can be abstracted, it can be broken down into something else. There has ultimately become a synthesis by which we can come to appreciate it.
For sure.
And in being incapable of understanding how that synthesis has come about is what leads to our conception of beauty.
You see, I'm of the opposite idea, in the sense that I'm assuming that the concept of awe must by definition have a lack of information attached to it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have as much information as you think you do, or as you might want to have, when you're trying to understand anything, aesthetics or not, I think it takes away from truly being able to make a judgment on what that thing is, including how beautiful it is.
That brings up an extremely valid point. It's which becomes difficult, especially in the art world, because you start merging the concept of however would we be able to have an art critic,
right?
If this guy knows absolutely nothing about art.
Have you ever met an art critic before, Mr. Artist?
I've met quite a few art critics.
What do you think? What do you think about art critics?
Yeah. Art critics are great because they challenge your emotions, and really it's how they feel about your art, and how they feel about your art affects how you feel about your art.
But that's
do you
ruining
find them
the point.
qualified?
I find them absolutely qualified. Any pair of eyes is a good pair of eyes, and it's good to understand every perspective, because ultimately every perspective is God's perspective. You know.
How so?
If you were to collect every piece of experience that was ever created, that to me is what I call God.
Deep. Wow. Aesthetics goes into philosophy of religion. And
No, absolutely. I mean, it's the concept of a God, even though it's highly it's a bit of a sore point in philosophy.
It's a bit of a sore point.
It is a bit of a sore point, but we have to address God from a philosopher's God, and that is ultimately
the idea.
The idea, a concept that is beyond tangibility, a source point, and it might be flying spaghetti monster. It might be some big bearded dude. It could be something that is just way beyond our perception, which I would probably hope is the latter. Anything capable of initiating the Big Bang should not be comprehensible to the human mind. But ultimately, this is how I think religious art has a lot of impact on people.
Religious art is a good topic.
Well, religious art has a deep impact on people because. You can start religious art, from whatever epoch in human history. Ultimately, the endeavor of religious art from the artist, it's not to say, the king, pope, or potentate of that, given time, is to try and comprehend this very concept of awe.
You don't think it's out to just be propaganda for
and
people? That's the political question, but it's also the influence which the artist uses. I mean,
that's the political question, but that's a chicken and egg question.
See, all art is religious, but it's the middle ground between truth and the lie. And so whether you're doodling or whether you're trying to convey a message, it's always both, because people will always get the wrong idea and people will always find the right idea at the same time, and that is really kind of the spectrum of how.
No, this is coming back though. This is coming back though to the idea of misinformation. Not misinformation. No,
absolutely. Misinformation is.
I would say misinformation.
Getting lost and being found is kind of the process. Art, whether you're doing art for a Christianity's sake or Buddhist sake. There's so much Christianity art, going back different eras or whatever, or Hindu art. Regardless of whether you're trying to convey a message or whether you're throwing paint on a canvas, you are conveying a message, and people are going to come up with their own ideas about it, and then they'll also try and dig in what you're trying to convey as well.
You see, this has turned me around a little bit. I'm sort of starting to falter back in the sense that I find that this, again, talking about misinformation, I'd rather not use that term because it seems like somebody's trying to be out there to misinform you.
But in a sense, they are. That's why you write a big question mark and you say why, so that people go why, and they ask themselves, because
it's not misinformation. It's ignorance.
Ignorance. I would just say lack of perfect information, in the sense that you have all the information you need to make sense of one thing. But
and everyone's ignorant on something.
Right, but not to get caught on semantics, I would just like to say, it seems that this lack of information, wherever it stems from, is actually necessary now. I think I'm sort of starting to believe in the sense of awe, and the sense of not really being there completely 100% to understand something in order to see its aesthetic value.
It's God, it's it is difficult to verbalize. How do you and perhaps that's why we have poetry.
It's that missing note.
That's why we have editing software.
That's why we have.
That's exactly why those things exist.
When things get difficult, hit Control Delete.
Yep.
But Alessandro, tying it back to your point regarding the importance of a lack of information or a feeling of ignorance. there's definitely a necessity behind that ties into awe. The concept that we're working with awe right now is that which is totally awe. A concept that is the totality of all information. Everything within all possible universes and outside of it. If we were to have full epistemological knowledge to every possible thing in existence, then there would no longer be a definition. There would no longer be awe. Simply because we could come to know everything. But since we do not know everything, we have that sense of awe. And that is exactly how it ties into art. Or a sunset. Or an empty street in Barcelona with a guitar playing in the distance.
All the stereotypes.
All the stereotypes. You have this conception of, you don't understand how the brush strokes equate into this magnanimous painting. You don't understand the physics behind the sunset. You don't know where the guitarist is in the dark alleyway.
It's that missing piece that leads you to find it.
Because of this mystery, you are overcome by this concept, ultimately, that I believe we can define as beauty. So,
but perhaps it's fake, though.
It's not fake. It's not fake. It's simply not knowing something. It does not necessarily make it fake. Making it something that you can come to know, I think that's simply beautiful. That there you see the Pietà or the Garden of Heavenly Delights, and you say to yourself, my God, another human has done that. I too could be capable of doing that. I don't know where I'd start. I don't know how I'd do it. It is possible. I'd be able to or take the sunset. I know I keep coming back to that, or rainbow. You can say to yourself, I may not be able to make the sunset, I may not be able to make the rainbow, but I can understand the physics behind it. I can understand why the light refracts off of moisture in the atmosphere in order to display this wonderful array of colors, or why it is the Earth rotates in ellipses around the sun. The capacity, it's almost a tease, a sort of a challenge to humanity to say, you can know this. You don't know it, but you can know
Absolutely.
it. And because you can know it, but you don't know it, there's a mystery within you that ultimately lends to this command of awe. And that is where our beauty derives from.
So then something becomes less beautiful the more you know about it. So the more you figure something out, the less beautiful it is.
It's possible, but not necessarily, because because every single thing that you come to learn begets more questions. Every answer begets more questions, and so simply because you may know how to paint a stroke, then all of a sudden you say, well, I can paint the stroke, but how do I make the paint? Simply because you understand the physics doesn't mean
it's not necessarily about the physics. I'm not trying to be very materialistic about all this. I mean, the physics is nice because it explains the physical world. But let's say, what if we're talking about
metaphysics?
There's also metaphysics. But what if we're talking about the beauty of an idea?
The beauty of an idea.
There is technically no physics at play. I mean,
for the listeners, this is something that we've been talking off mic about, and I would really like you to explain this more coherently, because up to this point,
you're talking to me, not the listeners. Okay.
Yeah, because I still don't.
The use of pronouns.
I'm still not 100% sure what you mean by the beauty of an idea.
So here's what I'm trying to get at here. It's that we're, at least from what I understand now, having listened to this bit of the conversation itself, that there's these three topics about aesthetics. There's the, correct me if I'm wrong, natural, general, and artistic. Mm-hmm. Got it? Yeah, memory retention.
Yeah, and each beget their own.
And and they all have their own, exactly. Yeah. That doesn't leave, I don't think, much room for the importance of things that we simply generate out of our brains, out of our heads, without any. I don't know how to explain it.
Welcome to philosophy.
Welcome to philosophy. It's basically, can we say that an idea that we may have, not of something else necessarily, but anything we come up with, including a painting, including a theorem, including whatever, can that also be considered to be beautiful?
Oh,
can
absolutely.
we find that? And if that's the case, then why is anything else that is outside of ourselves essentially better? What I'm trying to say is, maybe the most beautiful thing out there, or the most beautiful thing really, is lodged in our heads. It's our ideas. Our ideas.
See, if you want to talk about beauty, you have to talk about what's not beautiful. And what's not beautiful is also beautiful because of the properties of contrast. And, I mean, you really ask yourself, what makes something not beautiful?
Well, I will say this, in terms of ideas, I mean, let's say a genocide is an idea. Somebody has to have an idea for a genocide to happen.
That was a good
Hitler
point.
thought it was beautiful.
Well, a lot of people, I mean,
messed up as he was.
Name them in the last century. You know, there's been a lot. I'm assuming even before,
totally.
from how history has gone out. But regardless, the idea of a genocide, as bad of an idea as it actually is.
Could it be beautiful?
Ooh,
No, not could it be beautiful. Makes ideas.
But
if
an idea,
hold on,
if there's nothing more beautiful than an idea, how could the idea of genocide not be beautiful?
Hold on a second. If we're talking about contrast, I know that's where that was going to head. If we're the reason why I brought up genocide or any bad idea is to the counteracts with its good idea in the sense of peace or in the sense of understanding.
But in its bad idea, if I will, let's say a life is taken by Hitler or genocide or whatever it is, this evil thing. Imagine that life as a painting. This painting...
I'm sorry, as or has?
As.
Okay.
This life, as you look at it as a painting, is what it is. And if you see it for all of its qualities, you have to decide it's beautiful or you shun it. And that's your choice. And as genocide may be the worst thing, and it's not what you would choose, and it is not beautiful. To
you.
To me, absolutely not. But the qualities and the emotions that these people felt, regardless of whether they were forced on them or not, they still beg the question of what did they go through and why, and is it beautiful? And I would say yes.
So, are you aiming to say that suffering is beautiful?
I would say so, yes.
Suffering is beautiful simply as it is a consequence of life? Or because the concept of suffering in its own right is beautiful? And let me just rephrase that in the sense that suffering is beautiful because cause and effect necessitate the fact that as suffering is a consequence of existence, it is beautiful? Or a human being that exists without suffering, hypothetically, if such a being were to exist, would not be beautiful because they have no suffering?
You know, I would agree that a human being could not... See, suffering is the basis of samsara, of the beauty of the inner workings. Let's say you take a caterpillar that's making its cocoon, okay? And it builds and it liquefies and it's in its cocoon waiting, and you see it struggling out of its cocoon as it's ready, but it can't quite make it. And so you take a knife and you cut the cocoon open, and the butterfly emerges, but it's got weak legs, and it can't really fly away as much because it didn't go through that struggle or that suffering, that turmoil.
That butterfly is a little bit different from struggling that's forced upon you from an idea like a genocide or from the idea like any sort of...
Not really.
I'm sorry.
I guess what I'm saying is the human condition of beauty requires the lack of beauty to finally be in the presence of awe and to see it for the first time again and again. And again, you have to be wiped fresh with suffering. In a sense, suffering does clean you, as horrible as it is.
Yeah, but does it clean you unto the point of death?
That's
a tough one. This is something I can't even answer.
I don't think it's a tough one. I just don't think that's the way it works. I don't see it.
I don't find it a good thing, but as God is something that I don't understand, the isness of death and the fact that it exists and the genocide, I have to look at it for its pure colors and how it is. And I have to at least put it in its place in my brain. However I put it, it's either beautiful or it's...
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, to then say, I mean, we have definitely bad things in the world. We have definitely good things in the world.
But are the bad bad?
That comes from ethics.
That's
part
the
two.
question.
That does come from ethics part 2, but I'm just saying, I'm saying good and bad in the not necessarily in a moral sense, but in the sense that we understand they have
beautiful aesthetically.
They have beautiful aesthetic and negative aesthetics just means ugly, I guess. So the lack of beauty. I'm pretty sure that genocide has negative aesthetics, just like suffering has negative aesthetics. Some things just are like that, aren't they?
Spoils to the victor.
What do you mean?
I mean, if Hitler had his way, I'm sure there would have been some, twisted way in which history would have been able to vilify, the execution of millions of Jews by saying, "Oh God, the world is a much more aesthetic place because whites are now dominant."
See, that's what's coming back to bite me in the sense of awe, in the sense of lack of information. Because now I'm thinking, are the things that I think are beautiful now my doing, or is it simply because of the world I live in, right?
It
could be both, but it should just be one. It should just be me deciding.
It's always both. You work interconnected.
I'm putting a normative statement out there. I know, I understand.
You are trying to put in, which is really difficult because I mean I'm a fan of normative statements, but beauty is kind of my secret lust, and it's hard to put normative statements on it. No, you can't. I mean, no and yes. Beauty is a product of our time. There will be. I mean, look at the
time.
Look at how Roman men viewed women back in antiquity. They loved women, curvy and fat, and it was a sign of wealth. And now, I mean, even though the trend is changing, there was a period up until recently when we thought, anorexia was the hottest thing on earth.
Which we, by the way, do not condone.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Yes. The times in which we live certainly dictate our conceptions of beauty. And those conceptions will change, but that also ties back to the concept of information. What do we have access to? How are we able to perceive the world in which we live? And how have those perceptions come about? What led to us being, and the being by which our perceptions apply to the world in which we live? So Alessandro, to try and tie it back to your concept of, is an idea the most beautiful thing we can have? I don't think it is or it isn't. It's almost a trivial statement. It's an idea is necessarily beautiful only in the sense that if we weren't to have that idea, no beauty would be there. If we were simply non-entities floating around with absolutely no mind whatsoever. Like, imagine a state so senseless and blank. You can't.
An amoeba's
ideas.
You can't. Even a blind man feels.
Ideas.
Just to get to the crux of the matter, yes, beauty is necessarily dependent on our epistemological experiences, but that's simply a fact. It doesn't necessarily mean that ideas are the most beautiful thing.
I'm just saying it's a limit, though, because Jordan, let me ask you a question. You're a painter.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a question, but that was a statement. You're a painter.
Nice semantics.
You're a painter. You said before that either the most beautiful thing or one of the most beautiful things was color.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do me a favor. Think up of a color that doesn't belong or isn't yet in our visible light spectrum.
It's quite impossible.
Would you look at that? We've gone over time again. Will Jordan be able to come up with a brand new color? Will Troilus come to understand the beauty of ideas? And will we ever be able to figure out what is truly beautiful? You can only find out by joining us next Monday on May 6th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for the exciting conclusion to the Aesthetics Podcast, only here on Armchair Philosophy Podcast.blogspot.com.